Welcome to the Land and the Bible, where we explore age-old stories and biblical text through the lens of story, history, and the land itself. We will challenge common misconceptions, wrestle with skeptics, and explore the characters and hidden narratives throughout Scripture. Join us as we peel back the layers of history and tradition to uncover the truth at the center of the greatest story ever told. This is the Land and the Bible podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 0 of the Land and the Bible podcast. So in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about why we're doing this podcast and who we are, and why I think talking to you, Jameson, is very interesting.
I hope somebody else finds it interesting.
I've always found it interesting. So let's start with just a little bit of, how we met and all of that. So we met you in Cambodia.
Now, were you actually on that trip, or was it your partner?
It was both of us.
Okay.
Yeah. We just started talking we would just start talking about stuff there.
Yeah.
And this was, we were doing fundraising back years ago. We used to do it, and we still do some, but Between Pixels is a production company that I'm an owner of, and we did a lot of nonprofit fundraising content in a certain season of the company, and we were in Cambodia working on a project, and that's where we met you, and we started talking.
I saw the video you made for them.
Yeah.
And I was envious.
You're like, ooh, I need some of that so that I can raise some money for what you were doing.
That's right.
And it worked out. And I've seen so many different places around the world through a camera, and it is my preferred way to do it. It's beats tourism any day. So we were able to connect with you, and at the time you're living in the West Bank. You'd been there for a while. Well, tell us how you got there and what you were doing, and give us your backstory, and then we'll catch up with what you're actually doing there.
So I grew up. I'm a preacher's kid that grew up. My dad sort of traipsed us around the Southeast over the course of my childhood, mostly in Tennessee, actually. Actually from Alabama, so I call Alabama home. I was born there. All my aunts and uncles and relatives are there. Mom and dad are there now. But during my growing up years, we were really in Nashville for a big chunk, and different places up there. But so I'm a Southern kid, pretty normal life, really, until I graduated from college. And I graduated from a Bible school in Tennessee in 1997, and then that's when things sort of got weird, got different, know. And that what happened was I graduated, and like a lot of kids, I didn't have any direction at all. I know what I want to do. I mean, I've got a degree now, but so what? And how do you, and I was one of these idealists that I was just like, I'm just going to study what I like, and I'll figure out how to make money later, So I double majored in history and psychology, which are just worthless, in the job market. And I didn't know what to do. I was injured. I blew my left knee out playing basketball actually that year. And
dunking.
So I had to, no. But so
it's hard when your face is at the rim. It's really hard when you come down on your knee.
And some guy undercuts you. And it's, because your legs are at his shoulders basically.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. So, but I severed my left ACL. I had to have the surgery, and it was just like a rough season of life transitioning out of university. And in the middle of all that, my aunt showed up at the house one night, my mom and dad's house, and I was there eating and griping and moaning and complaining about life. And my aunt said, well, I know somebody lives in East Jerusalem, and they run a school, and they need help. You could do that for a year while you figure things out. And so I thought, why not? And literally, some people have these, stories where shaft of light comes down from the heavens, and the angels choir sings and all that. They get some sort of calling or direction. Mine was just, I had nothing else to do and got an offer,
Yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, why not? And so I went to teach in a little Christian school in East Jerusalem, Arab Muslim kids, for a year, and that year became 24 years.
Mm-hmm.
I got there, and I felt like I was supposed to stay. And I can't say I initially loved the place. I initially found it exciting, interesting, but also very difficult, and I kind of wanted to come home. It was too much to wrap my head around that I could make a life there. But I eventually came to that decision to stay, for one more year and one more year and one more year. And at some point you realize you're not going home,
Yeah.
And in the midst of all that, I met my wife. She's a Texas girl that came out also to serve, and met her at a Bible study, and
Yeah.
maybe,
As the story goes, right?
yeah.
Doesn't every Christian meets their wife at a Bible study?
Well, it should, I guess. It worked out. It worked for me. So
I didn't meet mine.
It's not a bad place to do it, I suppose. But that is actually our story. And anyway, it was in doubt here and there, but it worked out. A couple years later, we got married. We've had 5 kids along the way. Tacked on a master's degree while I was there in Middle Eastern cultures and religions, and so.
The Middle Eastern cultures and religions. That's your master's.
Yeah, and so what that basically means is I studied Islam and Judaism.
Gotcha.
Pretty good bit, and then I was also able to focus some of my studies on historical geography, of the Bible, the places and settings and where things happened, and some of that's what hopefully we'll bring to bear, over this podcast, and some of those lessons learned.
So we're working with history, psychology, geography, and Middle Eastern religions.
Yeah,
that's pretty
broad.
That's pretty awesome. That's a great combo.
Yeah, and again, I would not ever advise any kid to take those things in college, but yeah, I mean, it works, I guess. And so this is kind of what I hope happens. We were sharing earlier, and I was saying this, and it's true. There are far, far better Bible scholars than me. I've studied under them. They're brilliant, brilliant men and women that know the scriptures inside and out, and that know the places inside and out. But what I hope maybe I can bring to bear is the perspective of, just a sort of a local Southern boy that lived a really, really normal life until this weird thing happened and sidetracked it and sent it somewhere else. And so I hope what I can do is bring the things that I saw and learned there, back home to our culture maybe. And I think also there is with that maybe broadness, there is sort of like some assimilation where you can maybe pull some threads from the things about the culture, and some things about the geography, and some things about the scriptures, and maybe there are some intersection points there that are interesting if you know them. Yeah. One thing the Lord gifted me with is, I'm worse at it now, frankly, but for the vast majority of my life, I've been a pretty voluminous reader, just knock down books, and I know that a lot of people probably aren't, so, here's me, sort of nerding out on history and geography and culture and things like that. And, reading some giant book about, how Rome and Israel interacted over the course of 100 years or whatever, or reading some strange thing about whatever, pick the topic. Well, maybe what I can bring to bear is I could pull a few things out of there that bear on the Bible story and relate to culture, that make sense and help make the story we all know have a little different light on it. So I'm just trying to pull together some threads and say things that help.
And the land aspect of you living there, and I think this is a big piece of obviously the land and the Bible podcast is the context of the geography in the stories brings out a new level of texture and detail that you just don't get when you're reading this in the context of our Western, view of things. You're sitting there, you're reading it, and it does feel very isolated. And you're like, oh yeah, he went there and he did this thing, and we just gloss over it. Or there was this tree here, and you're like, okay, great. Well, I've never seen that tree. I don't know why that's important, but for you, it's very contextual.
Yeah, well, so when you live in the country for 24 years, and I'm an explorer by nature. You know, me and my wife have had, say, conflicts from time to time, because I'll see a road I've never been down and just be like, I want to drive down that road. Like, why? Because I've never been down it before. You know, and then she'll say, but yeah, but it's a dirt road and our car is not made for, it's not a Jeep. We'll be fine. And you know, and I like to explore. I like to go down to new roads and new places and see a thing I haven't seen, and, you know, and sort of push that boundary a little bit, maybe more than I should sometimes. But you spend 24 years, and if you're sort of geared that way, I feel like I know the country pretty intimately, and I know the spots. And so there are things I know intuitively. Like you say, Jericho, I have the picture in my head, and I know that's a hot, arid, dry place, low lying, foot of the mountains. You know, like they're just things that I kind of know, and those things do affect the stories. You know, I mean, there's a reason that Jesus is passing through there, because you need to get water if you're traveling through the desert, and that's where the road intersects with the road up to Jerusalem, and there's just things that you just kind of know if you've been there and traveled through it a lot. You know, or you know, maybe in the Old Testament where it refers to like Bashan, you know, Bashan, we'd probably say in the South. Well, that's the Golan Heights. And so if you've been there, then you know, well, that's way above sea level. It's cold up there, and it's much greener than the rest of the country. And so, you know, when someone refers to a cow of Bashan or Bashan, well, that means a big, fat, well-fed cow. You know, because that's the association, or, you know, and it just kind of goes on and on. Like you hear the place, you know what it looks like, you know, and then often that wetness or dryness or highness or low, you know, whatever, you know, where what road is connected to, matters in the story. Also later, some places were Jewish and some places were Greek and pagan, you know. So when Jesus goes to Caesarea Philippi to talk about something, well, the fact that the city was Greco-Roman, it was pagan and given over to idolatry and idol worship, and, you know, that kind of stuff adds a layer to the story that if you didn't know that, you wouldn't get everything that's going on. And so hopefully we can bring out some things like that, you know, and just kind of help people get a little bit fuller understanding, you know, of the text of the Bible. For me, like, I have a very, very high esteem, you know, for the text of the Bible.
Yeah.
Like, it's a beautiful thing. It's beautifully written, and it's wonderfully well preserved historically. Yeah. And it says great things, and it's full of deep wisdom. And sometimes, and most of the meaning is clear. Yeah. But sometimes there's a detail that pops, you know, when you know some other things. So we hope you bring that out.
Yeah, and I think for me, you know, there's definitely things you read, and maybe you've read it so many times, or you've heard it taught, or you heard it as a child or something. You know, I became a Christian as an adult, but some of the stories might seem contrived, or the details seem contrived. Like they're in there, and you're like, why is that detail in there? Yeah. And then, you know, here's one, in fact, and you were sending me sample videos of what some of the things we're going to produce when we do get to go over there together again in the future. And it was, you're like, so I'm at the site of the Peter's denial, you know, and we're here, and it says here in the text, and you're just reading it, and you're like, so, and then he said, and he denied him the third time, and at that time a rooster crowed. To me, when I read that, I'm always like, okay, yeah, and a rooster is gonna crow. But what happened on the video?
Yeah, on that video, at that exact moment, a rooster crowed.
A rooster crowed behind you, and I was like, wow.
It was as if we had paid him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you just go, and you just go, and actually, the rooster just crowed right now. It happens all the time. So, anyways, and I think that is like that's kind of what we're going to experience.
Yeah, and you see some of these weird details. Yeah. Oh, you know, we'll do a whole episode on David and Goliath, but, you know, just as an example of that, one of the things I never understood was, like, why would two armies camp and look at each other for 40 days? It makes no sense at all. Yeah. I mean, it's expensive because you're having to feed all these tens of thousands of people every day. You just sit there. You're having to stay at a, you know, a level of readiness, and, you know, if they attack us, you know, why are they doing that? When you go there and you instantly say, oh, okay, I get it. Because they are both encamped on really steep hills in defensive positions. Both of them wanted the other to attack, you know, and get the advantage. And as soon as you see it, you get it. The minute you stay on that valley, you're like, oh, I'd stay on that hill too, you know. And it's just things like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? All these little details that don't make any sense. You go there, look at it, and you're like, oh yeah, you're right. That does make sense.
Yeah.
And it's faith affirming because you're like, oh, the Bible does make sense. Oh, that is right. Which is really cool. And then sometimes, again, it brings out a detail in the story that it adds some level to, your devotional reading of the Bible. It adds a little bit of meaning, which is super cool.
That's awesome. Well, I'm really excited for this podcast, and I will say, I mean, I know you said there's obviously, people have done this kind of thing before. They've taught the Bible, they've taught about Jerusalem. There's no lack of content on the Holy Land, but I do think you bring a unique ability to tell the stories in a new way because you've lived there for so long, you know the land so well. So I think it's going to be great. I hope people get a lot out of it.
I'm excited. I hope so too.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for watching this introduction to the podcast and a little bit about us and why we're doing this. To find out more about this podcast and other content we have, go to thelandandthebible.com. And we'll see you soon.